The champagne was still cold in my hand when my father leaned in and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "You know nobody actually wanted you here." I didn't answer him. I took a sip and looked out at the dance floor where my nephew Brendan was spinning his new wife in slow, clumsy circles. He was laughing. She was laughing. The string quartet was playing something I didn't recognize, but that felt warm in the way that only live music can. My father's name is Gerald Whitmore. I grew up calling him Dad until I was 19, and then I stopped calling him anything at all. That was 22 years ago. I hadn't planned to be at this wedding. When Brendan sent the invitation to my office in Ottawa, I held the envelope for a long time before opening it. My assistant, a young woman named Priya who has worked with me for 6 years and who knows most of my history, watched me from across the room and said nothing. She understood when things required silence. I opened the envelope. Brendan had written a note on the back of the RSVP card, in the cramped, slightly sideways handwriting he'd had since he was a boy. It said, "Please come, it won't be the same without you." She already knows all the stories. I RSVP'd yes that same afternoon. My name is Vivian Whitmore. I'm 43 years old. I grew up in Barrie, Ontario, the second of 3 children born to Gerald and Lorraine Whitmore, my father, who sold commercial real estate, and my mother, who taught elementary school until her back gave out when I was 12. My brother Elliot is 4 years older than me. He still lives in Barrie, still works for my father's firm. He has a good life, I think. We speak twice a year, at Christmas, briefly, and occasionally in the spring when one of us remembers to check in. It isn't hostile between us. It's just the particular kind of distance that grows when 2 people have chosen entirely different things to be loyal to. My younger sister Audrey is the one who married first, and best, and who has always been my father's favorite. Not because she's the most talented or the sharpest, but because she never frightened him. Audrey became an accountant, married a man named Keith who coaches minor hockey, and had 3 children in 6 years. My father comes to every birthday party. He drives 40 minutes each way and never complains about the traffic. He was not at my graduation from the Royal Military College of Canada. I didn't invite him. But I want to be precise about that. I didn't invite him because I already knew by that point that he would either not come or would come and make it about himself. And I didn't want either version of that day. I had worked too hard for it. This is something I've had to explain to therapists over the years, that not inviting someone isn't the same as wanting them gone. Sometimes it's just the quietest form of self-protection you have. I grew up in a house where ambition was permitted for boys and suspicious in girls. My father never said this out loud. He was too careful for that. He said things like, "You don't need to push so hard," and "I just worry about you," and, memorably, when I was 16 and had just been accepted into a competitive science program in Toronto, "I don't understand why you can't just be happy where you are." I don't think he was consciously cruel. I think he had a picture in his head of what his daughters were supposed to look like, and I kept coming out wrong. Too focused, too serious, too set on something he couldn't quite see. The summer I turned 19, I told him I'd applied to RMC. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, almost a confused one, like I'd said something in a language he didn't speak. Then he asked me what I actually wanted to do with my life. "This is what I want to do with my life," I said. We argued for 3 weeks. He said the military was no place for a woman, or at least not the kind of place he wanted to imagine his daughter. He said I was being dramatic. He said I would fail, and I would have nowhere to turn, and that I shouldn't expect to come home when it didn't work out. I told him I wasn't planning to come home. I left in August with 1 duffel bag and $140 in a savings account. My mother drove me to the bus station. She held me for a long time before she let go. She didn't say anything against my father because she never did, but she pressed a card into my hand when we finally stepped apart. Inside she'd written, "I have always been proud of you. That will never change." I still have that card. It's in a drawer in my apartment in Ottawa, folded along the crease she made 24 years ago. I won't pretend that RMC was easy. The first year I came close to leaving twice. Not because of the academics. I was good at the academics. But because of the particular weight of being somewhere that feels simultaneously like exactly where you're supposed to be, and like a place that wasn't entirely designed with you in mind. There were more women than there had been a generation earlier, and fewer than there should have been. And the culture was in that complicated in-between state where progress and resistance exist side by side in the same hallway. I made 2 friends that first year who remain the closest people in my life. One of them, Paulette Arsenault, is now a lieutenant colonel based in Petawawa. The other, whose name is Sanjay Mehta, left the military after 8 years and now runs an engineering firm in Vancouver. We have a group chat, We've had the same group chat under different platform names since 2001. I graduated in 2003. I went into logistics and operations. I spent 4 years working through junior postings, learning the actual infrastructure of how large organizations move. Supplies, personnel, communications, the thousand small decisions that have to happen correctly before the visible ones can. I was promoted to captain in 2007. I was posted to Afghanistan in 2009, a tour that I don't talk about in detail in most settings, but that changed the way I understand patience and irreversibility, and what it means to be responsible for other people's safety. I came home in 2010 and was promoted to major the following year. My mother died in 2013. She had a stroke in the spring and lived for 11 weeks after, most of them in a hospital bed in Brigadier-General. I flew back 4 times. I sat with her when I could. She knew me until very near the end, and the last real conversation we had, she held my hand and said she'd followed everything, every posting, every promotion, every news article she could find with my name in it. She said, "I always knew you'd be something. I just didn't know what." I told her I wasn't something yet. She said, "That's the funny part, you already are." My father was in the hospital the day she died. We sat in the same waiting room for 3 hours and said almost nothing. When the doctor came out, my father cried in a way I had not seen before, quietly, with his hands over his face, like a man who had just understood the cost of something that couldn't be returned. I didn't comfort him. I'm not proud of that exactly. But I also can't say I felt anything that would have allowed it. I flew back to Ottawa the next morning. I didn't speak to my father for 6 years after that. Brendan is Elliot's son. He grew up in Barrie, went to Lakehead for his undergrad, and at some point, through channels I was never entirely clear on, became deeply, stubbornly attached to the idea of me as someone worth keeping in his life. He started emailing when he was in his first year of university. Short emails, nothing demanding. Things he'd read that made him think of me. A documentary about women in the Canadian Forces. A question about whether I'd ever been to Yellowknife. He never referenced the family situation directly. He just kept showing up in my inbox cheerfully with no apparent expectation that I'd be anything other than glad to hear from him. I am. When he called to tell me he'd proposed to a woman named Simone, that's how he put it. I proposed to someone, her name is Simone. She's a physiotherapist and she's smarter than me. I think you'll like her. I laughed out loud. He said Simone had been asking about me since the 2nd month they dated, because she'd found an article about a logistics summit in Toronto where I'd spoken, and had gone down a fairly thorough rabbit hole. She wants to know if you'll come to the wedding, he said. She already decided you're invited. She told me to tell you that part specifically. That's the kind of person Simone is. The wedding was in late June at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. The kind of place that doesn't feel like Ontario and then suddenly does. The light in the late afternoon, the particular greenness of the grass, the way a certain kind of laughter carries outdoors. Around 200 guests. A full sit-down dinner, speeches, a band that played for 3 hours straight and never seemed tired. I arrived alone. I'm comfortable arriving alone. I've been doing it long enough that it stopped being a statement and became just the ordinary shape of my life. I knew my father would be there. Elliot had warned me, in his neutral diplomatic way, 2 weeks before the event. He texted, "Dad will be at the wedding, just so you know." I texted back, "I know, thank you." That was the whole conversation. I had not seen my father in person since my mother's funeral in 2013. I found my seat at the reception and spent the first hour talking to Simone's parents, a lovely pair of retired teachers from Sudbury who had opinions about regional wine and very good stories about their daughter's teenage years. I was laughing, genuinely laughing, when I noticed my father across the room. He looked older. That sounds obvious, because of course he did. It had been 10 years, and he was in his mid-70s now, but it was more than just the white hair and the slower way he moved. There was something that had gone out of his face. Some certainty that used to sit there had been replaced by something softer. Or maybe just smaller. He saw me at the same moment I saw him. For a few seconds neither of us moved. Then Elliot appeared at his elbow and said something to him. And my father nodded, and I turned back to Simone's parents and asked about Sudbury in the summer, because sometimes survival is just choosing where to look. He approached me during cocktail hour. I was standing near the edge of the terrace looking out over the vineyard when I heard him behind me. "Vivienne." I turned around. "Hello." He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "You look well, thank you, so do you." A pause. The band was warming up somewhere inside. Someone laughed too loudly, the way people do when the champagne has hit, and the formality has started to dissolve. "I didn't expect you to come," he said. "Brendan asked me to." "Yes." Another pause. He's a good boy, he is. My father looked down at his glass, sparkling water I noticed, which was new. Then he looked back up at me with the expression of a man who has prepared something and is now deciding whether to say it. He said it. I want you to know, he said, carefully, that you were only invited tonight because Brendan insisted. Simone's family doesn't know anything about you. Nobody here has any idea who you are. You don't need to act like this is something it isn't. I looked at him, 22 years of silence, 22 years of postings and promotions and deployments and briefings and decisions made in rooms he would never enter. 22 years of becoming someone I chose to become, without any of his help or his permission, and this was what he'd brought to say to me. I said, okay. He blinked, he'd expected something else. I'm going to go get another drink, I said. It was good to see you. I walked back inside. Dinner was long and warm and full of the particular energy of a room where most people are happy. I sat at a table with Paulette, who I'd brought as my +1. Because if I was going to face this evening, I was going to do it with someone who had seen me cry in a parking lot in Kandahar, and still looked at me like I was worth something. And 3 of Simone's cousins from Montreal, who were effortlessly bilingual and very funny. The speeches came after the main course. Elliot gave a speech about Brendan that was genuinely moving and also mildly embarrassing, in the older sibling way. Simone's sister spoke about the physiotherapy practice they'd built together, and the kind of loyalty Simone showed to everyone she loved. Keith gave a toast that mentioned hockey 3 times. Then Brendan stood up. He spoke for about 10 minutes. He talked about Simone with the particular precision of someone who has studied another person closely and is grateful for every observation. He said something about marriage being the decision to keep choosing the same person, and that he'd understood what that meant by watching the people around him, the ones who had, and the ones who hadn't. He paused there and looked out at the room, and I thought he was going to move on. Instead, he said, "There's someone here tonight I want to acknowledge, because she's been a part of my life in a way that I don't think she fully knows." He looked at me across the room. My Aunt Vivian. I felt Paulette go very still beside me. Brendan said, "Most of you don't know her story, and I'm not going to tell all of it tonight because it's hers to tell. But I will say this." He took a breath. Colonel Vivian Whitmore of the Canadian Armed Forces has spent 22 years in service. She's been deployed internationally. She's rebuilt supply chains after floods and fires and crises that most people never hear about. She was awarded the Meritorious Service Medal in 2019. Last month, she was promoted to Brigadier-General. The room was very quiet. I hadn't told anyone at this wedding. I hadn't mentioned it to Elliot, hadn't mentioned it to Brendan. I had told Paulette and Sanjay and 3 colleagues. The promotion had come through in May. I was still honestly adjusting to what it meant. Brendan said, "She raised herself, she built everything she has on her own terms. And she still showed up tonight, which tells you everything you need to know about who she is." He raised his glass. "To Brigadier-General Whitmore, the toughest, most quietly remarkable person I know." 200 people raised their glasses. Somewhere across the room, I heard my father set his glass down. I found a quiet corner near the bar during the first song and stood there for a moment alone, breathing. Paulette found me almost immediately. She didn't say anything, she just stood next to me and handed me a glass of wine and looked out at the dance floor with me. After a minute she said, "So, Brigadier-General, he wasn't supposed to know, and yet, Simone," I said. "It had to be Simone. She's thorough," Paulette smiled. "I like her, everyone likes her," I said. "That's her whole thing." We stood there for another minute. The band moved into something slower. Brendan and Simone were on the dance floor, her head on his shoulder, his eyes closed. "Your dad's by the door," Paulette said without looking. "I know. You don't have to do anything." "I know that too." He found me an hour later near the end of the evening. Most of the older guests had gone. The band was quieter now, playing for the people who were still dancing, which was mostly the under 40s and Simone's mother, who had remarkable energy. My father walked up and stood a few feet away and didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't know. That's okay, Brigadier-General." He said it like he was trying the weight of it. "I didn't know any of it, Elliot, never. I didn't know about the medal." "You didn't ask," I said, not unkindly, just as a fact. He was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "More than one, I know that. I know there's no version of this where I can make up for what I..." He started again. "I was wrong. About what you were capable of, about what you needed, about what I said to you when you left about tonight." I looked at him. He was old. He was standing at a wedding that his grandson had built on a foundation of love, and somewhere in that room was the ghost of everything he'd done badly as a father, and he knew it. I could see that he knew it. I know, I said. I'd like to try. He said, if there's anything left of a chance. I'd like to try to be something better than what I've been. I thought about my mother in the hospital. I thought about the bus station in Barrie, and the card in the drawer in my apartment, and 22 years of building a life in the direction I'd chosen, without any hand from him. I thought about what my therapist had said a few years ago about forgiveness, that it wasn't an event you arrived at, but a direction you could choose to keep moving in. I said, I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm willing to find out. My father nodded. Once, slowly. Like a man who understood that this was more than he had earned and was trying to be careful with it. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. He went to find Elliot, and I went back to Paulette, and the band played on for another 40 minutes. In the car on the way back to our hotel, Paulette drove and I sat in the passenger seat watching the Niagara escarpment go dark outside the window. After a while she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "I don't know yet." "That's fair. Ask me in a week." "I'll ask you in a week," she said. The highway was quiet. The sky was very clear. Somewhere behind us, Brendan and Simone were still dancing, probably, or sitting close together in the way that people do on the last hour of the best night of their lives. I thought about the look on my father's face when Brendan said Brigadier-General. Not the shame in it, though that was there. The something else underneath. The complicated, too-late reckoning of a man who had decided what his daughter would be, and had been corrected by the daughter herself, without her even trying. Without her doing it for him at all. I had not become what I became to prove something to my father. I want to be clear about that. I joined because I wanted to. I stayed because the work mattered. I was promoted because of what I did, not because of what I needed him to see. Every decision I made in 22 years was mine, made for reasons that had nothing to do with that old wound and everything to do with who I had always known I was. But there is something, I will admit this honestly, there is something in being seen, even late, even by someone who should have seen you all along. It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo a bus station in August, or 3 weeks of arguments, or a waiting room in 2013, or a terrace in Niagara-on-the-Lake where a man told his daughter that no one here knew who she was. But it is something. It is one small imperfect thing in a life made of many small imperfect things. Paulette turned onto the highway. The headlights opened the dark ahead of us. I leaned my head against the window and let Ontario go by.